To North Korea now. North Korea is saying that should the United States enforce a naval blockade, which has been alluded to but not officially proposed by the administration, the DPRK would, quote, take merciless self-defense measures against a violation of its sovereignty, and they would consider it to be, quote, an act of war. Meanwhile, Senator Lindsey Graham, the man who is spending a lot of time golfing with the president and spending hours upon hours with the president of the United States, is talking about the possibility of war with North Korea. In a recent interview, Lindsey said that there's a 30% chance that President Trump will decide to attack North Korea first, and there's a 70% chance that Donald Trump would attack North Korea if they conduct a seventh nuclear test. Graham said that this was discussed during his round of golf with the president at Trump's golf course last Sunday. Let's bring in now former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, now the Dean of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, retired four-star Navy Admiral James Stavridis. He is also the Chief International Security and Diplomacy Analyst for NBC News and MSNBC. Thank you so much for being with us, Admiral. First, I must ask you, what is your reaction to a member of the Armed Services Committee who spends probably more time with the President of the United States right now than other members of the Senate, saying that we have a 70% chance of going to war if there's another test?
It worries me a lot because, let's face it, that's primary source information. I'd probably put those percentages slightly differently and a little bit lower. I'd say, Joe, there's probably a 10% chance that we do end up in an all-out, wheels-off war on the Korean Peninsula. And I think there's about a 20% chance that we'll end up exchanging ordnance with North Korea at some point in a fairly significant way. About a 30% chance of war, I'd say, from where I sit right now. Probably not that far off. Personally, if there is an above-ground nuclear detonation, I don't think we'll attack, but I think that's where you could get into a maritime blockade, which I think is the next logical step in this thing.
So, Admiral Stavridis, this is David Ignatius in Washington. Just want to ask you, one of the scary things to me about what Senator Graham said is that if you began a preemptive action against North Korea, you'd have to go all the way because you don't know where all their missiles are hidden. You've got to take out everything. You've got to have a worst-case scenario. When you think about war on the Korean Peninsula, and you've done that a lot in your career, you've had to, what do you think about in terms of the dangers of something really getting out of control and being devastating for the population there?
Yeah, I think, David, I think it's probably about a 10% chance that it all falls apart and we end up with nuclear detonation on the peninsula from Kim Jong-un. I disagree with the idea that we would have to go all the way the minute the first missile goes. I think you can do a lot symbolically, going after the North Korean fleet, for example, while it's in port. You can go after specific sites. But, of course, the worry is that Kim Jong-un would respond with artillery on Seoul, and then it just ratchets up. So legitimate worry. I think there's still some room for negotiation here. And I think that if Kim Jong-un launches one above ground, a nuclear detonation, that'll be the moment of peak tension, but it'll also be a moment of peak opportunity because hopefully at that point even China would step in with us and really put a blockade around this guy, both maritime and on the land border with China. That would choke off the economy. That would force him to the table. And then there's the question, Admiral, of Iran. Standing in front of a backdrop consisting of a ballistic missile and other military equipment, UN Ambassador Nikki Haley yesterday accused Iran of violating UN resolutions while offering up what the administration says is definitive proof.
In this warehouse is concrete evidence of illegal Iranian weapons proliferation gathered from direct military attacks on our partners in the region. Behind me is an example of one of these attacks. These are the recovered pieces of a missile fired by Houthi militants from Yemen into Saudi Arabia. The missile's intended target was the civilian airport in Riyadh. All of these weapons include parts made in Iran, some by Iran's government-run defense industry. The evidence is undeniable. The weapons might as well have had "Made in Iran" stickers all over it. The nuclear deal has done nothing to moderate the regime's conduct in other areas. Where do we go from here? Well, I think the president made the first start by decertifying the Iran deal basically with Congress so that Congress can start looking at these other things that Iran is doing. And yes, we have already started to talk to our partners in the Security Council.
In a statement, the Iranian government says it, quote, categorically rejects the accusation as, quote, unfounded, irresponsible, provocative, and destructive, adding, quote, the purported evidence is as much fabricated as the one presented on some other occasions as part of an agenda. And Iran's foreign minister tweeted, quote, when I was based at the UN, I saw this show and what it begat, along with a picture of then Secretary of State Colin Powell outlining the case for the invasion of Iraq. So, Admiral Stavridis, Ambassador Haley is laying the groundwork for something there. What is it?
She is trying to hold together a very shaky coalition of our European allies, with ourselves, and with the Sunni Arabs, so that we can confront Iran in all of these capitals, these proxy wars that are going on in Yemen, in Syria, in Lebanon, and most importantly, I think, in Iraq. So she's trying to hold that coalition together. I really disagree with the Iranians on this one to try and say this has echoes of Colin Powell at the United Nations. I saw that presentation as well from Secretary Powell. This one is much more substantive in terms of laying out the hardware. It's a little bit overly dramatic, perhaps, but I think it makes a pretty clear point. And I think Iran is pushing on all these points, and we're going to have to stand against them. That does not mean we should walk away from the nuclear deal. We should keep the nuclear deal, but build a coalition to confront them conventionally in the other areas.
David Ignatius, I'm wondering what insight you can give us from the Nikki Haley presentation yesterday, and also with what the Trump administration is trying to do here.
Well, I think the Trump administration has decided it's time to step up the pressure on Iran. Nikki Haley was arguing that Iran is in violation of a UN Security Council resolution that was passed in 2015 at the same time as the Iran nuclear deal, and trying to rally members of the Security Council to address this, take it seriously. She has, in that sense, a stronger international footing than we do arguably in dealing with North Korea. I do think we're in a period now where the U.S., working with Saudi Arabia and the UAE, are going to take firmer steps to deal with Iran, especially in Yemen. The Saudis and the Emiratis are nervous about these missiles that, as Haley says, the evidence is pretty strong that they have been moving missiles into Yemen. Those missiles can be fired at Riyadh, they can be fired at Abu Dhabi. So there's a feeling in Saudi Arabia and the UAE, we're living under the gun. We've got to do something about it. I think they're feeling very much that the Trump administration has their back, and so I think we are heading toward greater confrontation. What's worrisome is having confrontations on two sides of the world, in Northeast Asia with North Korea. At the same time, you've got something going on in the Persian Gulf with Iran, but that's the moment we're in right now.
All right, David, stay with us. Admiral James Stavridis, thank you very much. Always good to have you on. We appreciate it. Coming
Thanks
up,
a lot,
Trump's
Joe.
lies versus those told by President Obama. The big difference, according to the New York Times, Obama stopped saying things that were challenged by fact checkers. The Times' David Linhart has the definitive list of Trump's first-year falsehoods. Ahead on Morning Joe.
Jerry, just remember, it's not a lie if you believe it.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.